Be Your Best You, the Passionate to Purpose podcast with David Delaney. This morning we talk about magic on the Passion into Purpose podcast, and we bring some magic very much through the work of Catriona O'Curry, my guest on the podcast this morning. I'm just going to read something Catriona wrote, and it's in order for us each to awaken to our individual purpose, we have to let down our defenses. When we do, we become more present to our thoughts, emotions, and bodies. To be aware in this way is to be empowered, to be grounded in the Earth's life force, and to be more naturally connected to one another. Once aware of the emotional and energetic realms, learning becomes embodied knowing. Moreover, an expansion takes place in our minds and hearts, enabling us to feel the connection we've always had to what eco-psychologists call the web of life. One's true purpose is aligned with this universal support system. Catriona works as her personal goal, she says herself, is to become a worthy elder, which is to facilitate others in becoming competent, grounded ancestors for future generations. And she specialises in working with preteens, teens, and young adults who are struggling with anxiety. Catriona uses art and talk therapy, counselling, coaching, Reiki, and Cranio-Sacral therapy to help calm the nervous system of the child and to view the child within a family system to help regulate the whole family system. And there's magic in the work that she does, and indeed in the book that she has written, which we talk about in detail. Apologies in advance, the equalizer would not work. We had some gremlins this week in terms of recording, so just apologies for the poor audio quality for the first minute or so. But I'm sure you'll find Catriona's story absolutely magical and a delight to listen to. Catriona O'Curry, you are very welcome to this episode of Be Your Best You. It's great to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you, David. It's nice to be here.
Catriona, you're joining us from the wilds of Wicklow this afternoon.
Yeah, well, not exactly the wilds. I'm near the Wicklow town, but yes, lovely Wicklow. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, and you're joining us, Catriona. There's a lot of strings to your bow. Okay. You're a coach. You've worked, with relationship counselling, all that kind of stuff, psychotherapy, Cranio-Sacral therapy. You've got some magic, which we're going to talk about first. So there it is. We're live. I'm here looking at the book. You've Got Magic, which is written by Catriona O'Curry and illustrated by Rachel. Rachel's surname is
Murphy.
Rachel Murphy. Catriona, tell me where did this magic come from? Tell me all about the magic.
Oh God, where does magic come from? Well, interestingly enough, those were the questions that I started asking kids when I was doing research for this book. And I maybe one day I'll get permission from the parents to release some of those. I'm imagining, do you remember Give Up Your Old Sins? Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Something like that, because asking kids profound questions, to which we might sort of stumble around the answers to. Most of them have no trouble just using their imaginations to answer the question as if, duh, So where does magic come from is probably one of my questions in the back of the book. There are 2 pages of conversation starters for parents or teachers or to ask kids or to have conversations around the dinner table which is not your ordinary conversation. So what I wanted to get at was what animates things, what makes things be alive and come alive. I guess my mission is about trying to help dispel this notion that we're all separate and we're none of us connected. And I think the kids, they kind of naturally know that, and it's helpful to watch The Hobbit or Star Wars or Harry Potter or whatever. Those are actually, they're not in a separate realm. I think that realm coexists with the 3D reality that we think is the only one.
Okay. And were you noticing this? I mean, I know a lot of your work, Catriona, has been with young people with anxiety, for example. And have you noticed that there is a need for magic
Do you think they think it actually helps? Now, when we say magic, we think Harry Potter, but magic, I suppose, can be all things. It can be just something unique to one person that can help them through something. So is that something like magic in terms of the work you do? Where does that slot in when you're working with a kid, say with anxiety, and the conversation about magic comes in? Does it help, or where does that come into your work?
Oh gosh, that's a really good question. I never put those two things together quite that way. But I suppose in this case, I would equate magic with the superpower, and whatever your superpower is. And that's a question that grown-ups and kids are somewhat familiar with these days. So, and often I think the superpower is linked to the wound or the hurt or the trauma, something that occurred. I really like this idea of that you can grow from a trauma. There's a lot of stuff out there about trauma right now, and I'm really glad there is. But I've always resisted any sort of pathologizing school of thought around whether it's medical stuff or emotional or spiritual stuff. So asking, it's actually a really good question that I might ask each kid if I ever do have an opportunity to ask individually in my practice, but also in groups. I'm hoping to do groups in classrooms and maybe even live stuff online. What's your magic? And maybe they could answer that question for themselves. And they probably know the answer more than we would. It would be harder for me at 50, almost 58, it'd be hard to answer what's my magic. Yeah.
In your opinion, Catriona, where does the magic stop when we're growing up? Where like I can remember as a kid growing up, and there was magic in everything. There was magic in the bogland, there was magic in the river, there was magic. I actually took a walk home recently where I grew up, and there's no sign of children playing in the same places that we used to play as kids. It's all overgrown, and there's kids in the area, in the neighborhood. Where, in your opinion, does the magic stop, and what has happened to the magic?
Oh, I guess I want to say in industrialized society, technology and all that, but I certainly remember playing for hours and hours and hours in the countryside, wherever it was. When I lived in France as a child, we lived in Paris, but I used to take all the plants in the house and put them in my bedroom and explain to people then all about the plants and their aliveness and how they converted oxygen and CO2 into oxygen. But we also would visit the country a lot. It was very typical French, still is, to drive an hour or more outside into the country and spend hours and hours and hours out playing in the fields and observing nature close up and seeing that aliveness and feeling it, I think, through our senses. Society, the school system, I don't know. Corporations maybe have something to do with scaring the living daylights out of us.
We're not mentioning names, of course, but we probably know what you're alluding to.
It could be oh gosh, I don't know. I think there is people make profit from us being worried and afraid and preoccupied and caught up in a very different relationship with time, and which you clearly weren't today. No, I'm teasing. I
put a note in the footnote for the what actually happened, that the podcast, the scheduling went a little astray, let's say.
But it just makes us more human.
I was off making magic, Catriona.
Exactly.
So are we numbing our senses? Is that what I'm hearing? Are we actually numbing our senses?
Seeing that, do you remember that Pink Floyd video, "We Don't Need No Education"?
Yeah.
It was black and white, and you're put through this machine. Now, I'm not blaming any one person or any system, but I think that there comes a time, I did see statistics once, when we're 4 and 5, 98% of us have that that ability to be curious and creative and collaborative and inclusive, and we're not afraid. we're in awe of all of it. And we're asking questions. We're saying, how does that happen? And what is the cosmos? And what is death? And what happens after death? And all of those things that are natural, I suppose. And I think the older we get, especially this focus on careers and what you want to become, and instead of, who are you at your essence? And I suppose that's what I want to remind people of, not just the kids reading this book, but the grown-ups reading it to them if they're too young, or, who are buying it for the kids, to remember that actually we have everything we need inside us, and the magic is there, and we have the power and the resources and the energy, and even their gifts, our own unique gifts, they come built in.
And do we forget that? Do you think, because there's this talk of the attention economy, and you have all these corporations, I suppose, selling us what they think is magic. They're like, here you go, here's a new thing that, you can make a video that lasts 15 seconds and put some music, and it's really cool, and everyone will copy you. And, are we being sold, inverted commas, magic? And are we falling for it? Is it harder to create magic, or are we just accepting what we're being presented as magic, I suppose, is what I'm asking.
I think it's maybe easier than we think, and that's maybe what I feel part of my mission, or whatever my sole purpose is, to remind people that it's not outside you, it's inside you, and we come equipped with all of it, including all the tough stuff that happens to us. It's all about unpacking that. So yeah, I think we're supposed to, I don't know, we're supposed to come back to these things that many of us realized during the lockdowns, come back to being in community with each other, helping each other out, having real conversations with each other,
Because there's a fear of alone time. I've spoken to people on and offline about the alone time. People are actually, they don't know what to do with themselves when they have alone time. If someone's late for a podcast recording, for example, and there's a half hour bursting in there, people have half an hour and they don't know what to do with it in a lot of cases. What's your opinion on that? Like, kids, we're giving kids at the dinner table, we're giving them iPads, we're giving them technology, they are babysat by devices and by technology. Does this make the work harder?
The work to remind them about the magic?
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah. I think that, so I was trained as a family therapist. So I think in terms of systems. So naturally, all this stuff that's coming out about how we all are interconnected, and how the science and the neuroscience and the metaphysics the science is catching up with that. That's really validating for me, because I've always had that systemic lens, and I've been a bit lonely at times when I haven't been in circles where people think systemically. So I think that, say, for example, I might work with a kid and they have the confidence again in themselves, and they remember what they knew, what they kind of were born knowing. But then I can send them back into a family that is anxious for obvious reasons. So there's so much going on in the world, especially right now. And I've actually had conversations with parents where, if I've had an excuse to chat with them, say to reschedule an appointment or something, and I might say, look, I noticed that you were anxious, when you were in, and you were madly petting the dog or the cat, because I have pets, and, I can fix your kid, or I can help your kid to stop to have anxiety symptoms, nightmares, whatever is happening. But if I'm sending them home back to you, then, and you're anxious, do you need to talk to somebody? It could be me, could be my husband, could be someone else.
How does that go down?
That well, yeah, I have to have a certain amount of trust and connection first before I might broach the subject. It does, but this idea of bringing the kid and fix my kid, when, as you say, maybe at home there's a lot of mad busyness and distraction, and not just the slowing down that we used to have. I know our grandparents would be horrified, wouldn't they?
Absolutely, 100%. I'm conscious. The words we're using. We're using words like magic. Another word that comes to mind when I speak is the word. And I feel like a David White book. I know you recommend David's reading on your website. Resilience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Talk to me about resilience.
Oh, that's a big buzzword right now as well. I think, well, I think here's a mindset that could be helpful. What if everything we've been through, including the really, really tough stuff, is all a part of a bigger picture of, let's call it the hero's journey or the heroine's journey, about, even dark nights of the soul. What if in the very bigger scheme of things, in, I suppose, a spiritual sense, and that's one of my jobs, I feel, is to kind of make that more plain language and more accessible to people who might not even be spiritual, quote unquote. But what if it all is part of, what's been laid out for us to discover? And what if, as David White says, it's all about learning to become a half a shade braver? We don't have to bite off more than we can chew. We don't have to be extremely brave. We also don't have to do it alone. I think having friends is really important. I've heard a number of people on your podcast talk about that as well, and reaching out to people, reaching out to friends and saying, I'm struggling. I think the magic is in the vulnerability. The resilience is in the vulnerability. It's a matter of using skill and correct information to steer it or channel it in the right direction. The brokenness and the vulnerability. Yeah.
What did you want to be when you grew up? Did you grow up? I don't know. Are you still?
You can ask my husband. I know some of my teenage clients. I think they're I don't know if they're delighted or shocked or a bit of both sometimes when I'm the maggot with them. I wanted to be an actress. Yeah, when I was in high school in Ireland, and I wanted to go to RADA. But unfortunately my parents were splitting up that same year, and it just didn't happen. My advice in school was to study languages and be a translator, which was really boring to me because I'd grown up in different countries and spoke languages, and that was and nowadays it's quite common, and I'm delighted to see Ireland is much more multicultural. But I wanted to be an actress. Although if I look back and observe myself at that age, the advice I would give in terms of career counselling might be something like, do something visual. I have a friend who teaches art at a third level institution in Ireland, and she and I were pals when we were teenagers, and she was always the hippie bohemian one, and she went to New Park as comprehensive, and I always wanted to go there, and because there were such a focus on art. And every time I see her, she says, God, you have such an eye for texture and color and fabrics and so on. I would have loved to have been an interior designer, I think. I'm a wannabe interior designer.
Okay. Yeah. Where are you then on this? You've described your life as a squiggle.
A squiggle? A
squiggle. Where are you on the squiggle? Or tell me about the squiggle. Because normally people, they have the line, which is, you're born, you do this, you do that, you die. Or come back, depends on your beliefs, whatever it is. You've described it as a squiggle. Tell me about that.
Have I described it as a squiggle? Where have you been researching me? Well, I think there's a bigger pattern that maybe will make sense as you get older, as one gets older. So I'm approaching, I'm going to be 2 years from 60 in a month or so. And you can look back a bit more and see a pattern emerging. But I think there came a time when I started following my own calling, that following my own heart, I suppose. So I know one of the things, I was called to go to America in 1985. My family persuaded me to stay another year in Europe, and I went the following year. So I was called to go there. I happened to have an American passport, and logically you'd say, oh well, there was unemployment at the time, which was terrible. It was one of those waves in the mid-80s in Ireland. But sorry, remind me of the question again.
You're squiggle. You're squiggling.
It looks like a squiggle. I know. I remember my father saying to me when I came back to Europe, for the worst year possible, 1991, during the Gulf War, to try and find work. And I would get hired and then there would be a job freeze. And I wasn't, I was trying to come back to be closer to family again. And I remember my father saying to me, "You're always jumping horses in midstream." So that squiggle, it doesn't make any sense. And yet he's a highly intuitive person, himself. But there is a path, there's a level at which, and I've talked with friends around the globe about this, friends in Canada and Mexico, who kind of exist at this, maybe this, some people would call it the fifth dimension, or there's this sort of level of synchronicity and serendipity. It's some people call it the fifth dimension or the blueprint in energetic terms. That it is not a squiggle, it's linear, but you can't discern it from, as Einstein would say, the way that, the normal way of looking at things, or the usual way, or the way the problems got all created. So where am I on my squiggle? It's making more and more sense. And actually the COVID and lockdown brought that home to me. Like a lot of the realizations that people have had, and I know this isn't just true for me, I felt like, okay, now the rest of the world is getting a sense of, I've been in private practice, which is a very lonely thing, for 27 years. So there was a lot of yearning for community, those kind of values that we have hopefully not forgotten to appreciate now, since lockdown started, since the restrictions started lifting again. The things that matter to me matter more than ever. And so I feel like I am on track with the struggle in the world. There's something getting created in the world, and I get a sense that I'm where I'm supposed to be at the right time. And I haven't felt that in a while. And I think, in your 20s and 30s, it can be hard to know that your squiggle is actually headed somewhere. It just doesn't, you can't. Would you change
anything on the squiggle so far? Anything you say, I would do that differently?
No, I don't think so, because it's always revealed to me later, so far, that there was a reason for that. I have wise old friends who say to me, if it's meant to be, it won't pass you by, that sort of thing. It's always been a deepening and more, there's been more humbling, which just means that you have a greater ability to connect with people, I think, that's what we need. That's what my book's about. It's what
the connection. I've had a discussion with people recently, and one of the phrases that came out of it was, our brains are shrinking, but our minds are expanding.
Oh, wow.
And when we think of that in context of the work you do and the connection with other people, have you noticed a shift? You mentioned there a number of years that you've worked in the work that you do. Have you noticed that people's attitudes and people's connection to the work you do is different? I mean, certainly in the 80s and 90s, when I was growing up, people would see alternative therapies as, perhaps woo-woo, or, that's out there. She's a bit of a crazy person. Don't go. She's a witch, or all this crazy stuff going on. Have you noticed that people's attitudes have changed? Are we more connected? Are there more connections with the kinds of work that you do, and the exploration, for example, of a book about magic and how magic can actually help us connect with things like anxiety and stuff in your line of work?
There's a number of questions within that. First of all, the magic, I think it's really love. Like a 5-year-old told me that when I was researching the book. So that's the antidote to anxiety. And I think I've probably heard that on your podcast before through various voices. Ask me the question again, if you could.
I probably can't remember the question. Sometimes when I get a question, it started about connection and about minds expanding, but brains shrinking.
In fact, I lived it myself, because I left in 86. So every time I'd come back, I was the weird one in my family. I was kind of the strange one. And now it is gratifying to see how much is more mainstream in not just Ireland, but everywhere in Europe, and There is less, and there's more awareness. I work with teenagers a lot, and there's definitely something they take for granted, that about us all being connected, for example, and about just more relaxed approaches, less formal approaches to healing, more holistic. Maybe it does come more naturally to people. So it's very gratifying to know that Ireland has been, jumping on that as well.
I know, studying the work of Gabor Mate at the moment, and his approach, because I'm sure you're familiar with the work, with addiction and trauma and stuff like that. It's a people-centered approach. It's, I suppose the traditional ways we've dealt with trauma and addictions and stuff, it's throwing medicine and then talking about it. I suppose calming people, containing it, and then maybe at the end of a cycle exploring what happened to you. Whereas I think a lot of the focus nowadays is actually working with the connection. What is the connection in your brain and body, or your mind and body, or your spirit and body, that is causing this? And it's actually looking at that first, and then saying, okay, let's look at perhaps if a medical, if medication, for example, is required. Do you notice that there's a lot more of that in your work, that people are coming and exploring, the mind-body connection first, and then maybe going the other route? Has it flipped? Has it done a 180?
I don't think so yet. No. I mean, I remember reading Gabor Mate, his first book, and I was living in Canada at the time, and I remember having discussions with family members who were just horrified that, I mean, I was sort of saying hallelujah, because I was taking courses that were sort of on that edge, and so I felt in good company with my peers who were going through the same trainings and so on, but not necessarily in the mainstream or in my family. But now Gabor Mate is thankfully a very well-known figure. Somatic work would have been one of my specialties when I trained as a Cranio-Sacral therapist, and because I had the counselling already and I had the 4 years of energy medicine, that became my thing. And then training therapists, massage therapists and so on, not to stop people from emoting on the table, because therein perhaps lay the unfolding of something, let's call it magical, more enlivening. The blocks are in the body, the Bessel van der Kolk stuff about the body keeps score. I think our intelligence isn't in the head, and maybe to some degree, and I'm only seeing Ireland now, I'm immersed in this culture now. We are still disconnected from our bodies. I think, there is a dissociation there. We walk around, I'm doing this gesture of
the cutoff.
The cutoff between the head and the rest of the body. I think there's more wisdom in the heart, and that's what I think kids naturally know.
And culturally, it's interesting. You've traveled, and you've grown up in, as you say, you grew up in France, and are we way behind? Are we, like, I see people and we talk, and we're a little bit, certainly in the last 2 or 3 years, we're a little bit even emotionally connected, a little bit more than we were. But are we way behind as culturally, from your perspective and the work that you do? Is there a lot more anytime I hear this phrase, a lot to be done, or whatever the phrase is, a little bit done, more to be done, whatever it is, are we way behind?
I think that the lockdown has been, or these plague years have been an opportunity to be a great leveler. And I think there's been some acceleration in awareness and some humility that has, I think, propelled, I'm just going to say us because I'm in Ireland now, so I'm not going to stand in judgment of Irish people. I did have some concerns when I first came back that there was maybe some catching up to do in terms of this awareness that gurus can be dangerous. But that's a worldwide phenomenon now. So I would see practitioners who'd taken a few courses who would then say, well, I'm an expert in whatever, Reiki, whatever. I hope that what we're learning is that we can only do this together. We can only solve these problems by realizing that we're one great big organism, and we just need to figure out what our one part is in that organism. And for that, we need to heal our own bodies, minds, souls. It's all one thing. And then show up, as I imagine maybe some of the wise old monks and priestesses of, ancient cultures might have known, that when they got together, it wasn't about ego. The best ones, obviously, there were always egos, but let's picture somebody in a circle, and you speak when you're moved to speak by, call it spirit, rather than because you want to say something important and be recognized. And I think when we come together, I talked with a teenager yesterday about the Native American concept of, we each have our own unique medicine to bring. And I think the journey is about discovering what that is. And it's a challenging question to a 14-year-old, but I think that they're up for it. I think right now they're totally up for it.
So the squiggle and the journey has brought you to the point where you have this book, which is available. What's next for Catriona O'Curry?
Well, I've applied for Arts Council funding, so fingers crossed I get that. I would love to do some learning I'd like to learn to be an illustrator, because the artist in me, the visual artist in me, is dying to learn how to illustrate my own books. So I have a mentor picked out, and she's agreed. So I hope I can get the funding to take some of her courses and get some mentoring from her.
So do you plan to write more books? Is that something in the pipeline?
And part of the funding application is about having the space that I'm not so focused on earning a living. I'm very open to still doing that as a coach for kids, but I'd like to have the space to, just as you were talking about earlier, just slow down and be idle and not be, and be unplugged from all devices, because that's when inspiration comes. I mean, it can come in the middle of the night, but I think I do feel I have more books in me. But I need to not be, this is kind of coming full circle to the beginning of our conversation, I think, not to be worried about paying the bills. And I think when we're worried about paying the bills, we're less creative. Yeah.
Catriona, tell us where we can find you, and most importantly, tell us where we can find the book.
Oh, thank you. I have a website that is temporary, but it is working and has PayPal buttons, and it's called howtobecomewhole.com/books. So how to become, WHOLE, howtobecomewhole.com/books. I'm on Instagram as You've Got Magic. Bridge Street Books in Wicklow Town has my books, and they can always get more from me.
Excellent.
Collaborating with an artist in New York who was a former client, right? And we're going to redo my website and all that. So, but there'll always be a link to buy the book.
We'll find you there as a starting point on those. We'll get you somehow. Catriona O'Curry, it has been a pleasure. It has been wonderful chatting to you for the last while, and it has been magic. And may the magic never cease, and may there always be magic. And thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you, and may the force be with you, especially on your house building there, David. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks, Catriona.
Bye.
And that's it for another week. Thanks for joining us this morning, and do join us next time on Be Your Best You. Have a good week.